I have no recollection of ever having been kissed, and I have never been kissed by Mama. Mama has been in the habit of whipping and beating me almost every day. She used to whip me with a twisted whip, a rawhide. I have now on my head 2 black and blue marks which were made by Mama with the whip, and a cut on the left side of my forehead which was made by a pair of scissors in Mama's hand. She struck me with the scissors and cut me. I never dared speak to anybody because if I did, I would get whipped. This was the testimony of Mary Ellen Wilson. At the age of 10, having never been held or kissed, Mary Ellen Wilson uttered this sworn testimony. Mary was malnourished, her growth had been stunted, and yet she appeared careworn and prematurely old. The whole of Mary's body was decorated in cuts and bruises. Mary was born in New York to Frances Wilson in 1864. Her father, Thomas Wilson, had been a Union soldier. Widowed and unable to provide for herself and her child, Frances Wilson was forced to entrust her daughter to a local orphanage where she was adopted by Thomas and Mary McCormick. Thomas McCormick died shortly after. The remarriage of Mary McCormick to Francis Connolly proved disastrous for young Mary Ellen. Mary was severely abused on a daily basis. Mrs. Connolly beat and whipped her daily, usually before breakfast had even begun. Mary was often whipped twice a day, which neighbors reported that they heard a child screaming and pleading, saying "Mama" repeatedly on a regular basis. When the Connollys went out for the day or hosted company, Mary was locked in a closet and told never to make a sound. For this reason, many believed the Connollys didn't even have a child and were unsure from where the child's scream came. Eventually, neighbors saw glimpses of a bruised and injured young girl lying in the corner of the room under the window. They complained to the Department of Public Charities and Correction, from where investigator Ada Angel Wheeler was assigned to look into the Connollys' home. Familiar with investigating cases in workhouses, insane asylums, orphanages, and jails, Ada Wheeler was astonished by the abuse suffered by Mary Ellen Wilson. No child protection laws or agencies were available to hear the case of Mary Ellen. Wheeler was forced to plead her case to the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. The society's founder, Henry Bergh, saw the girl, much like the horses he routinely saved from violent stable owners, as a vulnerable member of the animal kingdom needing the protection of the state. Bergh used his connections to recruit a respectable lawyer who argued to the New York Supreme Court that the child would suffer irreparable harm if left any longer in the care of the Connollys. The judge demanded to see the child who had been the subject of so much controversy. Due to her apparent condition of health, as well as her scanty wardrobe, it was clear that no change of custody or condition could be much for the worse. Mary Connolly was convicted of several counts of assault and battery. No laws regarding child abuse were available to be found guilty in violation of. Though Mary Ellen Wilson was never made to return to her horrific adoptive home, she was relegated to a temporary home for delinquent teenagers. Distraught at Mary Ellen's continued plight, the investigator from the Department of Public Charities and Correction, Ada Wheeler, volunteered to raise and provide for her. From the moment a child is born, who is the person they need the most? The one they most depend on until they can walk, talk, and think for themselves. A parent, a guardian, a person to love and nurture them so they may flourish and grow. Human contact and affection is crucial to a baby's survival, and without it, that may not happen. So what happens when the parent is cruel and barbaric? Prior to this, there was nothing in the law regarding how a guardian could treat or raise his or her own child, adopted or blood-related. This being the first documented and publicized case of such a situation of extreme that Mary Ellen endured inspired the foundation of the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children in December of 1874. This is believed to be the first official child protective agency in the world, as well as leading to the establishment of an organization seeking to protect child welfare, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, SPCC, in New York. This organization was only the first of its kind Many non-governmental organizations of this type have existed since then. By 1880, there were 37 such organizations in the United States. By 1922, the number of non-governmental charities dedicated to protecting children reached an all-time high of more than 300. The New York Society went on to rescue thousands of abused children, creating safe spaces for them to live, and played a role with other agencies in the establishment of child abuse laws. The American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals had been established nearly a decade prior. This is a mind-blowing fact, considering laws are created and established to regulate and help control human society, but the abuse against animals took precedence in the law over children. The first federal animal welfare law was enacted in 1966, and as such, this means that animals had their inherent rights to safety prior to children. Animal protection entered the American colonial record in December of 1641, when the Massachusetts General Court enacted its comprehensive legal code, the Body of Liberties. Sections 92 to 93 prohibited any tyranny or cruelty towards any brute creature, which are usually kept for man's use, and mandated periodic rest and refreshment for any cattle being driven or led. In the 1830s, animal cruelty began being denounced in newspaper articles, yet not the same for children. Protestant revivalism fueled expansion of animal protection. By the 1870s, legislation and agencies inspired by the ASPCA existed in the majority of the states. It took a considerable amount of time for anything to be done on a national level. The Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act was signed in 1974 by President Richard Nixon. It was the first real bit of national legislation against child abuse. This act defines the minimum standards for child abuse statutes held by the states, and it also mandated the creation of the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect by the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. There was a need for change to happen on a national level, and yet widespread maintainment of the ideology that establishes treatment of one's children as determined by the individual was still common among American society. Amendment 14 protects an individual's right to life, liberty, and property. In Mayer v. Nebraska, the Supreme Court defined liberty in the context of this amendment as not merely freedom from bodily restraint, but also the right of the individual to establish a home and bring up children, according to the dictates of his own conscience. This correlates to this case in all cases of child abuse, because while the government cannot tell a parent how to raise a child, the government can, and did, create laws to protect the children of those homes should the parents not treat them properly. To this day, statistics show that 3 children die every day due to abuse, and many more continue to live in abusive environments. They suffer behind closed doors, away from the eyes of their neighbors and local law enforcement. However, that does not mean there is not hope for them. Just as there was a need for change in 1874, there is still a need for more to be done today. There is still the potential for policy implementation which can and will further transform our views and prevent further harm to children.